Welcome to Our Town, a 30-minute podcast brought to you by Best Bark Communications, a small but fierce client-centered marketing company powered by decades of experience and well-established business networks.
This is Andy Ockershausen, and this is Our Town. And we're talking with, and going to talk with, a very, very good friend of many years and a legend in journalism in Washington, D.C., Mr. Chuck Conconi. Thank you for being with us, Chuck.
Andy, thank you. I hate you to say many, many years. And I always worry about being known as a legend because legends are great stories, but not often true.
But so many people know the name Conconi and know you, but they don't know, and I did not know till we started talking here today, where you were born and where you went to school. And this was a surprise to me. I thought you were a native.
No, I'm not a native. I grew up in a town called New Philadelphia, Ohio. My parents were... Mother and father only had 8th grade educations. They were, immigrant Italian kind of family. And they all worked in the coal mines. Every male in my family, my father, my uncles, they all worked in the coal mines. Because when they first brought the first immigrants over from Italy, they advertised there's jobs in America. When they got here, it was the coal mines. And so they spent their time in the mines. I was the first, I think, male in my family to escape the mines.
But the coal mines in Ohio or
Pennsylvania?
Yes.
No, coal mines in Ohio. Down it's the area around New Philadelphia, Ohio. It's sort of northeastern Ohio, but it's big coal country. Now, sometimes the ceilings are low. I mean, some of them, what I'm saying is the roof is only like 4 foot. So you're working bent over all the time. And they worked in the old days when they carried these carbide lamps with flames in them. Right. And you always think about, God, how awful that was, because you have methane that goes in the mines and boom. My father once told me, he says, you don't know what darkness is like until something happens, it all goes. He says, you lose all sense of up or down or sideways.
Oh, my God.
So luckily, I was the first in my family to go to college. I went to Kent State University in Ohio because I didn't know where else.
It was a wonderful school.
Yeah, it was a wonderful school, and I had
Is that a state school?
It's a state school, and I almost flunked out. I was just an abysmal student. I didn't know what I was doing, and finally, you're going to find this hard to believe. I thought the only thing you could be is an engineer or a businessman. Believe it or not. And I knew I couldn't be an engineer because my math skills were abysmal. So I thought, I'll try to be a businessman. Well, I kept flunking economics and all those courses. And finally, I'm in desperation. I have been in my 3rd quarter on academic probation. It's my last and out the door. And I pick up the school catalog and I'm paging through it and I stumble onto a school of journalism. And I thought, I didn't know you could major in something called journalism. I mean, believe it or not, I didn't. So I went over and the guy took a chance on me and everything clicked, changed everything in my life. And I became a Dean's List student, and then I went out to Northwestern Graduate School, and my first working experience was in Chicago.
Well, the Northwestern was a great journalism school.
The Medill School of Journalism, yeah. So it's usually among Columbia, Medill, and Missouri at the time were considered the 3 top schools. Yeah, I didn't realize that either, but I didn't even know about master's degrees, but some of my friends are gone. I went.
But that Northwestern's big time, yeah. and having that degree from Northwestern, I'm sure that connected you. And then you worked in Cleveland, did you tell me?
Well, before that, I'll do this very quickly. I get drafted during the Berlin buildup. This is in the 60s. And I go to Fort Leonard Wood, and long story short, and I end up at Fort Belvoir. They're going to make a supply clerk out of me, and I think, I'm not going to tolerate that. So
that was perfect with your journalism degree. You'd be in supply.
So I went over to the Chief of Information's office, and he says, I need an editor for my paper. And he says, I'll try to get it changed. So I come back a couple of days later, and he said, I can't get it changed, but I've got a suggestion, but I'm not going to tell you. You have to tell no one that I told you this suggestion. So I said, what do you think? And I said, I know what you want. Never mind. So I wrote a letter to Senator Paul Douglas of Illinois, who was my senator. And within 2 days, vocal orders came from the Pentagon making me editor of the Fort Belvoir Castle. So that's basically how I got to Washington. But I wasn't sure. I wanted to go back to my job in Chicago, and I hadn't been a very good reporter there, and they were reluctant to take me back. They had to because I had been drafted. So I stopped in Toledo, and the Toledo Blade.
They had a great paper.
Yeah, great paper, and I was there for 2 years. I didn't like Toledo at all, and I tried to get back to Washington, And I'd come down for an interview with the Washington Post, and I was treated really badly. They treated me like I was something awful. And I walked across town, and I went and interviewed with Sid Epstein, who was the city editor of the Evening Star. And he says, look, kid, he says, I like your look. I'll put this on a stack of papers, and we'll hire you. At some point, I thought, well, that's a kiss off. So I went back and took a job instead of the Cleveland Plain deal. I was there about 3 months when Sid calls. Sid Epstein was one of the great editors of all time.
Oh, yes, a legend also.
And Sid, Sid hired me, and then I went on. I covered the civil rights movement. I covered Martin Luther King's assassination, and then I was on my Washington spin.
Well, the Star at that time was a big force in this city.
Oh, terrific force.
A terrific paper because, the Star owned WMAL and Channel 7, and I worked for them over the years. And I love the paper and love what it had. And then when it began its demise, we all felt that it was unfortunate that the Star was going to eventually go out of business.
Well, I loved that place because in many ways it was one of the last of the places, as I had in Chicago, as part of the front page. Characters, cigarettes burning on the desk, cigarettes smashed out on the floor, somebody drinking a beer or a shot at their desk while they wrote. And we were all, we all thought we were junior Hemingways, all the young guys. We lived fast and chased women and, and we did all that kind of stuff. And I was there until, right after the civil rights movement, covering the assassination. And then I could see when Nixon was elected, this was going to kill the civil rights beat. So I gave it up and went to the Hill and become a press assistant to Senator Gaylord Nelson of Wisconsin, where we put together Earth Day. And that got me in another whole direction. And very quickly, I wrote a book with Stu Udall, who had been Secretary of Interior and under Kennedy and Johnson. And then I went off freelancing for a while, which is a real tough thing to do. And I realized at some point I had a daughter. I'd split with my wife. I had a daughter who was getting ready to go to college, and I needed a more steady income than you can't get. And the Star was purchased by Time and asked me to come back. Sid was then made managing editor, and he really liked me. And so I came back. And I was there. This was when the Time magazine had this experiment. They were going to have weekly publications within the daily publication. And I was working on one from 11 to 6 in the morning or something like that for Alexandria and Arlington edition. And all of a sudden, and I was still freelancing, and I'd written a piece on Sally Quinn, who was Ben Bradley's wife. And I wrote a piece for Playgirl magazine, and in it I basically said when the Washington Post proud profanes Sally Quinn died each morning on the ABC television news. It was seen in Washington.
Experiment.
Yes, it was seen in Washington that God and divine retribution did indeed exist. Ironically, she liked it. So I'd had lunch with her, and all of a sudden I get a call from the Post, and I come over, and Ben wants to see me. And now at this point, I'd only been back at the Star for about 3 months or so. And he says, well, Sister Quinn and Brother Haynes Johnson, says...
He had worked with you at the Star, correct?
We worked at the Star. We covered the assassination of Martin Luther King together. Now, we flew out of here at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Braniff cargo jet out of Dulles that night. But anyway, so they hired me in the style section as what they call an assignment editor. And it happened in fact, I was there a month till someone in the personnel department said, all we got is your name, address, and social security number. And I said, that's all you need. So these ways you fill out something. And I stayed then, for 13 years, and I became a columnist, a personalities columnist.
But that was a famous section, the style section. That was Ben's baby.
Oh, Ben did a great job with it. It's a sad reflection today of what it was.
Oh, it was a great section, and I know you had some sort of a friction with Tom Shales at one time, did you not? Or?
Oh no! Once Tom and I I still see Tom nearly every Saturday.
Where is he writing now? He disappeared from.
Well,
Washington
he's living out in McLean, and he's sort of isolated himself. And the only people he usually sees are my wife and me, and we oftentimes would go out there on Saturday and watch old movies together. No, I used to battle from time to time with Jack Carmody.
That's true.
Who wrote a television
Captain Airways.
Captain Airways. But Tom, and it was it was the editor of the sections office, which at that time was Shelby Coffey and then Mary Hadar. Then there was my office. Then there was Carmody's, and then there was Tom's. And he used to negotiate between,
But it was a fun time.
It was a great
paper
time.
was bursting with energy.
And the style section had a phenomenal cast of people. I was talking to someone earlier today. He had a book from the New Yorker, and one is the editor of the New Yorker is David Remnick. I remember when
David, right.
I remember when he came in and
He
went
was
to
a
work.
sports writer, wasn't he?
He went to sports, but he also came into style and did a lot of style. Brilliant guy.
And then while you were there, were you teaching then? You were at the University of Maryland, and
I did.
You became people would listen to you for advice in journalism.
Oh, I actually taught 2 courses out at University of Maryland, and I did it for a couple of years. And then when I really started working at the Post in the style section, I had to give it up. So I've lectured at some time or other at every university in town, Catholic, American, GW, and all of them. But I love to talk about journalism. I love to talk about where it's going. I'm not sure anymore for you and I. And then I started doing WTTG television.
I remember that.
And then I started doing WML.
You did a show with Chris Core and talk. And,
Trumbull and Core.
Did a lot of great things, right.
And went through over 11 years or so out here, nearly every Friday night. And like we had just talked to Mel, after my wife would pick me up and we'd go up to the 2Js or when he and Mo.
2Ks and 2Js.
So
they were Washington places that we all hung out. Now, when you were down at the paper, incidentally, one of your not employees, but fellow employee, George Solomon, was sitting in that seat one day.
Sure, I know George.
He's doing a great job at Maryland, He's working in that journalism school. And it's just been great. Well, we're going to take a break now and then be back and talk to him. I'm fascinated, but Chuck Conconi, you told me a lot of things. I hope people have realized how much there is you have done. And we'll be right back here on Our Town.
Are you retired or soon will be? Is your will up to date? Don't want to leave a mess for your family to clean up. I'm attorney Mike Collins, the guy who sends you those invitations to my estate planning seminar. I'll teach you how to save taxes, avoid probate, protect your heirs from lawsuits, bankruptcy, even the divorce court. Keep your money in your family with our innovative Reservoir Trust. Watch the mail for your invitation. Tuition's free when you register online at MikeCollins.com. That's MikeCollins.com.
You're listening to Our Town with Andy Ockershausen. Brought to you by Best Bark Communications.
We're talking to Chuck Conconi about Our Town. He's been a big part of Our Town for many, many years. I didn't realize his career included Fort Belvoir, but that's a good place. But Chuck, you worked at several of Washington's leading magazines, am I correct?
Yes, I worked for the Washingtonian magazine where I was editor-at-large for about 13 years.
Oh, I knew that.
And I now write theater reviews, not movie, but theater reviews for Washington Life magazine. I do that mostly because I love going to the theater and I can't afford to go to that much of the theater. So I've written, in the last 2.5 years, I've written about 150 or more reviews.
Wow.
So,
well, in Washingtonian, you used to did you do the Post column about what's going on? Harry Jaffe
worked for me. I did I ran the front of the magazine called Capital Comment. Harry did a great job. It's interesting. It was about a year or two ago. He gave it up because he said it's not worth, the Post isn't, basically what it was at one time or another, and he stopped doing it. And I saw Harry just a couple of weeks ago.
He's written a book about the man that didn't get to be president, right?
Sanders, yes. Bernie Sanders. He wrote a book on Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
In fact, I do a television thing called Focus Washington where I interview various people around town, and I had him in and interviewed him about his book.
How do they air that?
It goes out on YouTube and
PBS,
it goes to YouTube and all those kind of places. In fact, I did one of the first ones on Susan Eisenhower, and when she decided she was no longer a Republican, and when she decided she would vote for Obama, and so I've been doing those. I've done.
Do they still live in the area of the Eisenhowers?
Well, no. She has a place in Gettysburg.
She married to David, correct?
No. David's her brother.
Oh,
David's married. David's married
to
Julie Nixon.
Yeah, right.
Married to. No, Susan has She lives I think at the Colonnade, and she has a place in Gettysburg overlooking the farm where her grandfather.
My grandfather had a farm there, right?
And in fact, she took us on a private tour. That was a fascinating place. And then she just recently bought a place, a kind of a summer getaway to be near her grandchildren in Portland, Maine. So she's a lot of places.
She gets around, huh?
She gets around.
Well, what in addition to, did you write for Regardes for a while?
No, I don't think I ever wrote a piece for Regardes. I still see him from time to time.
How did you get that lucky to miss Regardes?
We
see you every year at Regardes.
Yeah,
Welcome back to season.
He had one of the best magazines in town. I mean, he was a best anywhere. It was a great magazine, and he had more discipline, which has always been his problem, and he had a wider advertising base, which he thought it would exist with the developers and real estate people. And when the bottom fell out of that,
boom, he fell out.
And it's too bad because he had a brilliant magazine and he had some brilliant people. You mentioned Harry Jaffe. He had some really good people who wrote for
Brian Kelly.
Brian Kelly, yes, who's still the editor at U.S. News and World Report. And Brian he had an instinct, and he says that, for picking good editors, knowing how to find good editors.
Young people.
And I still see Brian from time to time, and Brian was a unique editor.
Strong.
Brian actually came out like I did, out of Chicago. We both had worked at one time for the City News Bureau of Chicago, which was a kind of a Ben Heck, Charles MacArthur front page thing. And it was a crazy
had all
place.
the newspapers out there.
Had all the newspapers, radio and television. And so, for example, there would be a criminal court's murder trial come in. Gone to the jury, they say, "Okay, kid, city press kid, you stay here and get the verdict." You'd sit there through the night until they came in, and then you'd run to the phone.
You did the legwork.
You did the legwork for them, and they all, they had.
But you were learning. Learning the business.
It was
from the ground up.
It was like in the movies, in those old movies of the '40s now where they talk. It was just like that. So I was lucky enough to get a taste of the old journalism.
Your timing was excellent.
It was fantastic.
You must get this request, because we get it in our business, and Janice gets it all the time in her business, from young kids that, how do I get into this? How do I get into that? And they always asking the same question. We give them the same answer. You got to start at the bottom.
Yeah, you got.
There's no shortcut.
Except journalism is tougher now.
It must be.
I had a couple of friends who asked me to write letters to get their kids, one in the Northwestern graduate school, one in the Columbia graduate school. And I did, and I basically said to both of them, I don't know what you're going to do with this. And they've struggled to find jobs, because when I came out of Northwestern with my master's degree, there were major newspapers flew out to talk to us, and we all went to pretty good. I went to Chicago's American, which had been an old Hearst newspaper, and I worked out of Tribune Tower. A couple of friends of mine went to the Philadelphia Bulletin, Philadelphia Inquirer, the Milwaukee Journal. They went to all the major papers. They don't do that anymore. People aren't flying. There are people out to pick people from the journalism school.
Well, I blame a lot of ills on our society with cable television. Being in cable for years, I know what it is. But it's so dominant now. There's so much out there, Chuck, that there's so many sources. What are we doing in our own house with 500 or 600 channels? Just incredible.
It's cable. It's the internet. It is, and I look at things. I mean, I look at the Hill paper. I write a column occasionally for the Hill paper, and I look at the Hill paper, and it's a great thing, but you can't keep up with it all. And the younger kids now think that they don't have to read newspapers. They just don't do it because we get our news off the internet. Well, what they also forget about a newspaper is you page through it, and you see stories I call you trip over stories. You see stories you had no idea were going to be there. You went looking. They go in and they look for something. They read it and go. We did I do consulting work with a public relations firm here, and I remember they were talking.
That'd be Corvus.
That'd be Corvus.
It's a big firm.
And Corvus MSL now, and owned by an even huger, big international operation called Publius. But there was we were worried about some of these young kids coming out of school. They couldn't write. So we were hiring someone to come in teach them some writing. Actually, I brought Harry in because he was teaching for a while at AU. And they sat around the table. There must have been 15 of them, and asked them, where do you get your news? None of them was from the newspapers. Some of them said from the Colbert Report. And I said, that's entertaining, but it's not the news. And that was it. They don't really... it sounds like audio. When our day, we were really smart.
No.
But they're not doing it anymore. And you're right about I'm not sure what happens in journalism today.
Well, with newspaper, I couldn't exist without the Washington Post. It's not my favorite politically, but I love the paper. I know what it is and how much it means to our town because I grew up at the Star, as you
Sure.
did.
I love
Star
the
was
Star.
a very important part. The Daily News. I read all three papers. Now I read Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post.
Yeah, I get 7 days a week delivery of the Post and the New York Times at home.
And the time, I can't finish the Times. It takes too much time.
I know.
Too much time with the Times.
It really is one of the greatest newspapers
Oh,
ever,
it is. It's
ever.
fabulous.
Nothing compares.
Well, we're talking to Chuck Conconi, a man who grew up in journalism, and we're on Our Town, and we'll be right back. This is Andy Ockershausen talking to Tommy Giacomo and bragging about his restaurant, The Palm.
Hi, I'm Tommy Giacomo. Why don't you come down and see me at the Palm Restaurant? I've been there for 43 years. We have great steaks, great lobsters, great food. Caricatures on the wall. It's just a fun place to eat and drink. We're located at 19th and N, just below DuPont Circle. For reservations, call 202-293-9091. That's 202-293-9091. www.thepalm.com.
You're listening to Our Town.
This is Andy Ockershausen, and this is Our Town, and we're talking with Chuck Conconi, a man of great experience in journalism, television, radio. I mean, he's done it all, and he was with the Washington Post, the Washington Star, as Chuck knows, we are the Star people. And then he had got into PR business with Corvus.
Well, it was after I left the Washingtonian magazine. I was sort of in a semi-retired state, and then I thought,
Was that before Jack retired? Jack Limpert? He
Yeah,
was a
it was
good friend
before.
of
Yeah, it
yours.
was before Jack retired. He retired a little after that, and it was about the time that Phil Merrill died, and Phil was he was a bombastic character, but a great guy. He really was a
Absolutely.
great guy, and he was one of the smartest people I ever worked with. I mean, we had neighboring offices, and sometimes the walls would quiver when he was in a rage yelling at someone. And we've actually had times when people on the floor above would complain.
Was he a writer also?
Phil
I know
could
he was
write.
the leader.
No, he was a smart businessman and real estate developer. He amassed quite a fortune.
Did I hear?
And but it was interesting. I would walk into his office, and I'd be completely prepared on something I knew everything A to Z on, and he would invariably ask me a question I hadn't thought about. He had that unique
Like he was laying in
talent.
wait for you.
He just had that unique talent, and it was one other funny story. One night, we were my wife and I were at a formal dinner at Firenze House, which is the residence of the Italian ambassador. Very elegant place.
Oh, gorgeous.
And
Oh,
we
wow.
were standing by this food table and all that. And my wife had worked for years for the U.S. Immigration Service. She had been a Schedule C appointee, and she worked a lot in Cuba and other things like that. And he had been appointed. It was during the Bush administration. They had appointed him Import-Export Bank, and
Yes.
and he was there, and there was somebody who was connected with immigration, and so we're standing there talking at the table, and he proceeds to get in an argument with my wife, who was very, very common. She'd sit
Very
there,
opinionated.
and my wife would sit there, oh, and then she would go back, and he was getting louder and louder and louder, and here we are in the embassy, and people are moving away. They're moving away because I think something. But he was, you had to understand it didn't mean anything. It was just that he had this flamboyancy, that he was just a marvelous guy, and I respected him greatly. And
Well, he built quite an empire, and I think his newspaper has done very well also. And
he owned a lot. He owned a lot of buildings in Washington.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he owned a lot of buildings in the district. In fact, he owned the Washingtonian is at the corner of 19th and L.
Yeah.
He owned one on both sides, not the building we were in, but he owned two buildings just kind of across the street from it. And he owned a lot of places. I think it was Aspen. It was one of the ski places. He loved to ski. So,
Well, and now is Ellie still alive?
no, she just died about a month ago.
Oh, that's right. I did read about Ellie.
Yeah, last time I
and the
saw-
daughter is running the magazine.
Yeah, the last time I saw Allie was a special salute at the Washington Post for guy. He's a dear friend of mine. He
Well,
died.
last time I saw her was at the annual luncheon for Washingtonians of the year.
Why am I blocking his name? Bill Raspberry. And Bill Raspberry was dying of prostate cancer, and they had a big thing, and she was there. And both she and Haynes Johnson, they both didn't look very ambulatory. They had canes, but Haynes died much sooner. She just died recently. She's a wonderful woman. And when Phil was ambassador to, what was it, some economic session in Brussels, and she went back and forth, but she essentially was in, and when he had the other appointment, she essentially ran the magazine as publisher. And she was always a voice of calm and reason, just the opposite.
That's why they were so compatible, right?
It was
because they were completely opposite.
Yeah, and as boisterous and as wild as Phil could be sometimes, he adored her and his children. I mean, in the end, he was the ultimate family man, which you don't often find in Washington among top figures and especially politicians.
And he was a politician too, and had a lot of political clout.
Yep.
I knew that, and I loved the magazine. And Jack Limpert worked for him for years, and a good friend of yours.
And Jack worked even earlier. I mean, he was there when Lachlan Phillips,
started
the magazine and owned the magazine. So he went back almost to the very beginning.
Well, my personal observation is the magazine has turned too much of a food thing for me. I don't know if they do hard news like they used to.
I don't think as much, but the food, they used to say, they used to say 2 legs held the magazine up, why people subscribed. One was all the restaurant reviews, and one was that front of the magazine, Capital Comments, which was kind of gossipy, I guess, in a way.
The gossip was important.
But, and that was important. And the restaurateurs, when you had Ron Schaaf, not Ron, it was, we were just talking about him, Robert Schaffner was this food restaurant critic. People still buy it for that reason. So that's what keeps.
They do their best.
And it was I spoke at some magazine conference, and people from New York and all around the country said, "How do you guys do it?" And they have and I don't know what it's like now, but at that time, the Washingtonian had one of the highest newsstand sales anywhere.
Is that right? That's
percentage sale, and we're among the best of the regional and city magazines. So it was there
are a lot of copycats now in the area.
Yeah, Jack Limpert
had only one Washingtonian.
Jack Limpert had the formula down, and nobody understood or knew Washington the way he did.
We really, really enjoyed working with him on a lot of things. Well, I want to say that this has been so delightful, Chuck, to get caught up with you, because you told me a lot of things. I've known you and your name forever. Told me a lot of things. I hope our listeners, and I know our podcasters, this will be up there forever, Chuck.
Okay,
it goes out in space.
That's frightening, yes.
It's going to be there forever. And it's been great. Now I want to make sure you are aware that you have an invitation to our launch party, where you will meet your fellow launchers. We hope to have 50 or 60 of them by that time. You're their 25th. And we'll have at least 25 more by that.
It's a good milestone number, and I love being with you. I've known you for so long. We go through shouted at each other at all the restaurants, Duke's, Mel Krupin's, the Palm. We're
getting out. We have a saying that Janice and I live by. A lady that was in her late 90s and lived in Cleveland, wrote for the Plain Dealer. Her advice to everybody was get up, get dressed, and get out.
Yes,
and we do it, and you do it too.
I try.
And thank you so very much for your time and your experiences, and it's been great. And I hope the audience understands what you've been through, because I do. It's been great.
Well, thank you.
The Star Days were wonderful.
This has been a thrill to be able to talk about that.
It is. And thank you, Chuck Conconi. And this has been Our Town with Andy Ockershausen and Janice Ockershausen, and we look forward to our next podcast. Thank you.
You've been listening to Our Town Season 1 with your host, Andy Ockershausen. New Our Town podcast episodes are released each Tuesday and Thursday. We welcome your comments and suggestions on how you like the show or who you'd like to hear from next. Catch us on Facebook at Our Town DC or visit our website at OurTownDC.com. Our special thanks to WMAL Radio in Washington, D.C. for hosting our podcasts.